Anybody on the call that doesn't know me, I'm Andy Agafangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force, which is an international community of individuals dedicated to helping to improve the way the financial system works. What we believe is that the finance sector is profoundly important to economic stability, political stability, the well-being of society generally. We think the finance sector has a responsibility to become a force for good. We believe that the world is at a tipping point, an inflection point, particularly post-COVID, and that all sorts of energies and initiatives really ought to be dedicated to helping to make the world a better place to what it was pre-COVID. So there's a very strong Build Back Better theme running the Transparency Task Force activity at the moment. As you're all aware, the topic this evening is technology. We believe that technology is a natural ally, a friend, if you like, to transparency. We believe that technology can provide all sorts of clear and intelligible information to give people what people really need to help them to make informed decisions. We think that kind of clear and intelligible information is absolutely vital to drive up the outcomes that people are achieving with and through the financial services sector. So we think this topic is very important. It's quite a creative title, Turbocharging Transparency, Truthfulness and Trustworthiness with Technology. There we go, about as creative as we can get, really. So I think we're talking about a thing that obviously matters to me, matters to the Transparency Task Force, and is also, of course, relevant to each of you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So it's great that we've got a pretty decent crowd tonight to talk about a very niche but a very important topic. As always, we'll be inviting everybody to very briefly introduce themselves. I must, however, please emphasize the briefness. It's very important so that we keep on track. And we're going to go in the following order. We're going to go to Ian Tyler, then Johnny Ruck, hi Johnny, then Susan Cuff, and then we'll go to Michaela. So Ian, Johnny, Susan, Michaela, very brief introduction, who you are, what you do, where you are, and why the topic of turbocharging transparency, truthfulness, and trustworthiness with technology is of some interest to you. So Mr. Ian Tyler, you're on the spot, sir.
Okay, very quickly, bank treasurer by background, consultant in recent years, a non-exec director for a couple of financial services firms. And I guess that's the reason why I'm here, because I'm very interested in how, whether, financial services can do a better job in the way that it services the clients. So,
thank you, Ian, that's perfect. And where are you?
Oh, I live just to the north of London, just outside London, in Hertfordshire.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. And we now go all the way over the Atlantic, faster than Concorde, to Florida, to Mr. Johnny Ruck. Johnny.
Sorry, I thought you'd muted me. Hi, afternoon, everybody. My name is Johnny Ruck. I'm the CEO of Scorpio. We are a technology company that built technology around corporate actions, but around the missed value in corporate actions. Long road. I'm very interested in this because technology is the way forward without a doubt, and yet there's a lot of pushback against it from those who really should be taking it in to help their clients. But the pushback is unfortunate and not the best, and it's definitely stopping everybody moving forward. So it'll be very interesting to hear what everybody has to say today. And as Andy said, I'm luckily here in Florida, where it's beautiful.
Thank you, Johnny. You're making us feel jealous already. Okay. The Transparency Task Force are big fans of Scorpio, that's Johnny's firm, and a proposition they're developing called the Hub. And I can already tell you that there are a few people in the crowd tonight who would want to know more about what Johnny and his colleagues are doing, and I will make sure we carry out effective introductions. One of the nice things about the Transparency Task Force is our ability to connect people, not just within the UK, but quite literally around the world. Thanks, Johnny. Susan, lovely to have you with us. It was nice to chat to you yesterday, and please introduce yourself. Thank you. Then we'll go to Michaela.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I'm Sue Cuff. I am in the talent management business, so I headhunt, I recruit staff, all in financial services, and have done for over 40 years. I also manage people's careers, help them into their next roles and so on. So FS has been my world for a very, very, very long time. I've seen huge change. What's never changed is the need for excellent, truthful, transparent communication. And that starts at the point at which companies reach out to hire people, the messages they use to try and hire them, messages that they lie behind them, and whether they live up to them. So from sort of cradle to grave, communication is key in my business. And that's one thing that, as I say, has never changed. And I love being part of TTF. It's very interesting. I believe Andy's doing something quite remarkable, and I'm very proud to be part of it. So here's to a good evening.
Thank you, Susan. You're very, very, very kind of the comments. Thank you. Let's go straight to Michaela.
Oh, hi. I'm Michaela Sanjadovich. I am in Toronto. I am covering a lot of things by, so I'm a, how can I say, cover the quantitative side, and I worked in finance, and I'm also interested in whatever stock market and biotech and banking and kind of too many interests. Now I am a bit, I read a lot about con people and about, and I'm very interested in unmasking and exposing all of these schemes.
Michaela, I've just put you on to mute only because we have to manage our time so preciously this evening. I hope you don't mind, but it makes a lot of sense that we do that. So thank you, Michaela. I'm going to move on swiftly. We're going to move on swiftly to Johnny, then to Natalie, then to Stephen, and to Gavin. Hi, Gavin, lovely to see you. But first, let's go to Johnny.
You mean this Johnny?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Johnny, and I was a nanotechnology scientist, engineer, and now I'm studying global prosperity at UCL, and just very interested in all anything involving fairness, and anything that's a big part of the economy is very important in that regard. And I'm in the northeast of Scotland, where it was snowing today.
Great to have you with us, Johnny, in snowy Scotland. Thank you. To Natalie, who I think's in Surrey somewhere.
Yeah, snowy Surrey as well. We still have snow actually from the last few days. So I'm Natalie Hines. I'm the Industry Partnership Manager at the University of Surrey. I look after art and social sciences, and that includes the business schools and all our colleagues experts in fintech, finance, and accountability. We're really interested in anything around technology and how technology is changing society. So that's why I'm here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Natalie. I invite Natalie, in fact, I invite everybody to put some information about yourselves into the chat. TTF is great to encourage networking, and all of you are doing something interesting that will be of interest to somebody. So please don't hesitate to do that, Natalie, and everybody else. We now go straight to Stephen. Hi, Stephen.
Hi guys. So I'm Stephen. I head up product for a company called Recordsure. We effectively record or help banks to record customer conversations, be that in sort of mortgage sales or kind of wealth management or financial planning conversations, but those conversations that typically haven't gone recorded, and analyze those all the way through. I'll tell you a bit more about it later on, so I won't go into too much detail, but I guess for me, trust and transparency has been really important. I grew up in financial services. I work with banks and for banks for nearly 20 years now, so it's always been a key issue.
Thank you, Stephen. We got to know about Stephen through Joanne Smith, the chief exec there. Great lady, great organisation, wonderful proposition. Exactly the kind of thing that TTF wants people to become aware of. Wonderful that you're with us. Mr. Gavin Starks, I think I know where you are. I think I'm right in saying that probably about 10 feet beneath you is the River Thames. Is that right, Gavin?
Correct, yeah, and about 500 metres that way it's Tower Bridge. So hi everyone, I'm Gavin Starks, formerly ran the Open Data Institute, was chair of the Open Banking Standards, and now running a non-profit called Icebreaker One, and we're just in the process of starting to roll out Open Energy, which will be the equivalent of open banking for the energy sector.
Wonderful, thank you, Gavin. Really pleased you're here. Gavin's also a TTF ambassador. Several of you are ambassadors, and Gavin's also on our advisory board. We're now going to Christoph. I'm also so pleased when Christoph's with us because I can say his name correctly, and I'm very proud of that. So, Christoph Grabowski, please introduce yourself, sir. Thank you very much.
And it's almost.
Where are you?
Almost perfect. It's Krzysztof Grabowski. I'm living in Warsaw, in Poland. And my personal, professional passion is corporate governance and business ethics. But I am also a securities broker, retired already. But I have also written several programs, computer programs for brokerage houses. So I understand very well how technology can help or make some losses or some trouble.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You remind me of when you came over to England and we met in person that day in London. It was lovely to have you with us. Thank you. Mr. Ian Beeston, say hi.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ian Beeston. I'm one of the co-founders of Money Alive. Money Alive helps advisors, employee benefit consultants and pension schemes communicate with their members and their clients. So tonight I'm going to be, when I'm talking about transparency, it's going to be particularly around the area of communications. Our founding mantra was better information, better decisions, and better outcomes. So we feel very aligned with the objectives of the Transparency Task Force, and pleased to be a subscriber.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Ian.
you.
Be aware, Ian, your broadband's a bit wobbly, so you might need to go on to audio only when you're speaking later. Let's see how we get on. Thank you. We'll now go to Francisca in Austria. Francisca, please say hello. You're on mute, Francisca.
I live in Vienna. I have been a victim of mis-selling or a scam. And, you know, I'm interested in fairness in the financial arena, and this is why I've joined.
Thank you, Francisca. Nice and short and sweet. Perfect. To Kim. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm Kim Schweitzer, founder of Time for Change London. We focus on companies having a purpose beyond short-term profits, living their values authentically, tying it into my background, which is total rewards with a focus on M&A and executive compensation, fairness, and really looking to help Transparency Task Force in their goals and objectives to help better the industry.
Well, we're getting, excuse me, we're getting superb input from Kim currently on a range of matters. We go from Kim to Sunil. Lovely to see you, Sunil. Sunil's been a very, very active and long-standing member of TTF. I think must be one of the first people that joined, Sunil. Lovely to see you. Say hi.
Thank you. Hi, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Sunil Chadha. I'm a project director at Punter Southall Analytics, a TTF ambassador, and I sit on the advisory board of the Association of Professional Fund Investors. I'm a disruptor, welcome technology, but also aware of some of the sharp practices that are going on in the data feeds, deletion of trades and data. So crap in, crap out, as far as I'm concerned. And the infrastructure around all of this needs heavy regulation.
Thank you, Sunil. To Greg, then we'll go to Herb in New York. But first, let's go to Greg. Thank you.
Hey, hi, Andy. So yeah, Greg Solomon. I'm 35 years in mostly investment banking, broking, other financial services. Started with an IT background, front office quants. Spent probably 15 years doing risk and regulatory change. Certain amount of corporate actions like that point, and certainly Susan, I'll hope to connect with you later. Apologies from the outset, I only have until 7 because I have way too many charity obligations and I have another meeting starting then.
Thank you very much for being with us. Great. We'll go to Herb, then we'll go to Andy, and then we'll go to Georgia. Georgia, you've just timed your entry perfectly. You're about to introduce yourself. Herb, lovely to see you. I have fond memories of when we met with Herb at the event we ran in New York. I think it was last year. Herb, say hi. Thank you.
Yes, it was 2019. Good to see you, Andy.
Likewise.
And good to see the whole crew. You know, I think, again, this is very important. And Alex, thank you also for all your coordinating and reach out to me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I do consulting in the area. I do assessments. I look at the technologies and things that change, disruptive technologies especially. And 40 years in financial services and banks, and the legacy technology, the legacy ways of doing things. I'm also on the board of SkyTop ESG. I just think a huge light needs to be shown on all of this, and take it out of the woodwork. Until there's transparency, there will be fraud, and as long as there's fraud, there will not be trust.
Wow, you put that so well. We can make that a strapline for our whole mission statement, Herb. That's superb. Mr. Andy Axelate, who's in the foothills of the Alps, I do believe, today.
Well, just south of Cambridge, which is a lot flatter. So, yeah, it's Andy Aikenhead from Axelate. So, good evening, folks. Snap with Herb. Actually, I've spent 40 years in financial services, starting mostly in investment banking. So, 10 years really trading credit. About 20 years ago, really, I got involved more in, I guess, leading change or sometimes recovering change, but always there was technology at the heart of it. So, and a lot of what we do now is around cultural change, as well as dealing with difficult situations, I guess.
Thank you very much, Andy. And Andy's providing TTF with lots and lots of input and support in a number of areas, principally around what we're describing as change management oversight. Thanks, Andy, for being here. Last but certainly not least, we come to somebody who's very new to TTF, Georgia Stewart. Georgia, please introduce yourself. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Alex. I think we had a bit of a late edition yesterday, so I'm really glad to be here. I mean, I don't have that many years in the financial services industry. The company that I run is 3 years old, and it's called Smello, and we're all about bringing transparency to the investment space, so both retail investment and pensions, helping people who are putting the capital into the system to have a better idea of what they're funding and have a better voice all the way through to the companies that are then affecting them again, kind of in society and in their environment. So I guess I'm going to get to tell you a bit about that later and what that means for us. But we are, I suppose, using activism in a way in financial services to improve outcomes for investors and hopefully over the long term.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you very much. Alexandra, can you pick up an action for me, if you don't mind, which is to fix up a call for myself, Georgia, Johnny and Sander. Georgia, you're doing some things that might be of interest to Johnny and Sander over in the States, so we'll have the connection there. And also, Alexandra, can you please connect Georgia with Gavin? Georgia's background is right up Icebreaker One's street, so to speak. And I think that Gavin and Georgia could be good contacts for each other as well. Georgia, you really want to know what Gavin's doing because I think you'll strongly identify with it and relate to it. More from Georgia later. Thanks very much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. Alexandra, you're going to cover off a couple of housekeeping notes, and then we're going to go straight to Mr. Ian Beeston, who I hope has a bandwidth that's going to cope with what needs to happen. So, Alexandra, over to you, please. Thank you.
Hi, evening everyone. I'm Alexandra. I'm head of events at TTF. So just a few quick things to let you know, we are recording the event and we will be uploading the recording to our YouTube channel. If there's anything you regret saying or you don't want us to include, please let me know. I'll put my email address in the chat, but you might have it already. Also, please do use the chat to introduce yourselves, put your Twitter handles in there, your contact details and any comments you have during the symposium. I'll be circulating all the chat notes tomorrow. Also, if it would be great if you can, and if you want to, if you could help us tweeting during the event. I'll put our Twitter handle and some hashtags you can use also in the chat. And I think that's everything.
It is. And just one thing I think we should add is we really do have a very strong sense of purpose within the Transparency Task Force. So I invite everybody to think about the hugely powerful part that technology can play to accelerate the transition from where we are now to where we need to get to. Let's not underestimate the opportunity for tech to turbocharge us to where we need to go. And the reason we have our speakers today is because all three of them have got something that are good examples of the kind of things that will make the world a better place for various reasons in various ways. I really do hope you find what they're about to say interesting. We have a very, very relaxed and formal kind of environment here. So if you do want to say something, raise your hand either electronically or literally, and let's make this a nice, engaging, interactive event. Mr. Ian Beeston, let's pass over to you, and hope your bandwidth is going to be okay. If not, it might be wise to go to audio only, but let's see how you get on. Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy, for inviting me, and thanks to Alex for inviting me and for organising it. Andy, if you can let me know if there is a problem with the connection, I will switch my video off. But can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, great. So, because, as I mentioned earlier, I work for a company called Money Alive. I co-founded it about 5 years ago with some other people who had worked in the financial services industry as long as I had. And between us, we'd actually been in the industry 100 years, we reckon. So we've been in the industry a long time, and we kind of identified trust and engagement as the real challenges that we thought the industry faced. So when I talk about turbocharging transparency with technology this evening, I particularly want to focus around the transparency of communications. When we started the business, one of my co-founders, his dad received a communication from his pension fund, and it was something that's called a pie exercise. And in summary, what it asked him was, would you like to forego future increases in your pension for a one-off increase in your pension now? That is what it said in summary, but actually that document ran to 90 pages. So my colleague, his father, really couldn't understand a word of it. And why I've raised this is because I think you could argue that by running to 90 pages, that was an incredibly transparent document, because it covered absolutely every scenario possibly going. But of course, by being 90 pages long, it became the opposite of transparent. Although it was full and honest, it actually was completely hopeless at actually getting the information over to the person who it needed to. And it had very much been written from the scheme's perspective and their lawyers and their compliance people, not the person who was actually reading it. And I believe that this problem of communications really being almost for the benefit and written by the people in the industry rather than the people who read them is why we are kind of where we are today. And I mentioned in a tweet today that I was going to reveal some stats about the state pension, and I want to use these really just to illustrate this point further, that you would kind of think that the state pension is uncontroversial. It's a universal benefit that everyone gets, and it's in the news regularly. You hear news on TV about it. There's a lot of coverage in newspapers about the state pension. We've got some wonderful government resources, including the Money and Pension Service, the Pensions Advice Service, the Money Advice Service. And yet I was going for a walk, a socially distanced walk with a couple of friends of mine over Christmas who are both in their 50s. And I started asking them some questions about the state pensions, and I was absolutely shocked by how abysmal their knowledge was. So what I decided to do was do a survey. So last week we commissioned a survey of 52 adults in the UK who are in the age 50 to 60, so people approaching their state pension. And bear in mind what I said, this is something that everyone hears a lot about. And I just want to share you some of the results from this survey that we did. So 90% of the people that we asked got the state pension age wrong. So 90% of people don't know, based on this sample, what the state pension age is. In fact, 38% of respondents said 62, and 38% of respondents said 69. So that shows you something about the chaos of communications around the state pensions. 65% of the people, we offered them, is the state pension in the range of £50 to £100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200, or 200 to 250 pounds, and 65% of people didn't know the correct range that the benefit was in. And another startling statistic was, we asked people if inflation went up by 1%, what would the state pension go up by? And 70% of people said that the state pension would go up by 1%. So that's 70% of people got that wrong. And only 3% of people got the correct answer, which was 2.5%. So, you know, if the state pension goes up 1%, and that's the triple lock, which I'm sure you'll all recognize that expression, triple lock, and yet people just don't get it. So this really leads me to the conclusion that I firmly believe that for transparency to work, communications have to be engaging. And unfortunately, they also require people to use judgment. And going back to the example of my friend's father who got the 90-page document, judgment was required to reduce that document to something that he would actually understand. And of course, once you start using judgment about what you think people should see and what people shouldn't see, that can then open you up to criticism. You know, one man's executive summary can be another man's half-truths. And so I think if you try to communicate in this industry in a way that people understand, you will always lay yourself open to criticism. And I'd be really interested in us all discussing this after I finish my talk. Another thing that I think in order to be transparent really is you need to think about the timings of your communications, because the way that a lot of communication about financial matters is done at the moment is kind of blanket, really. You know, an advert might be put on the TV about a scam alert, and for a large number of people, it may be irrelevant. Or it may be that a communication, although it's transparent, is given at the wrong time in a person's life. So I think in order to be transparent, you also need to think about how you time communications. Another great problem, challenge, I should say, that the industry has is that people are perceived often to have skin in the game. And as soon as a recipient of some information thinks that the person who is giving them that information has some kind of interest in the outcome, they will discount that information and they'll think, well, you're only telling me that because you might want to hang on to my money. And a really good example of that is something called second line of defense. And this is something that pension providers have to do when people want to make a withdrawal from a pension. They have to say, do you understand the tax? Do you understand what happens on death? And we have an advisor called Professor Rosalind Searle, who is a psychologist who specializes in trust. And when we went through this with her, she immediately saw the flaw in this idea that because the deliverer of that information has got skin in the game, has an interest in the outcome, they will be perceived as partial, and therefore they won't actually pay attention to the messages. And Ros also memorably says, and I'm sure you're all aware of this famous quotation, but trust arrives in steps, but it leaves on horseback. And one of the problems that this industry has is it's so beset with scandals. I mean, I'm thinking particularly of pensions here, about scandals, about mis-selling, about pension scams, that there are real trust issues around the industry as well, which makes it even harder for it to communicate. So I've outlined a lot of the problems. I'm just going to tell you in 1 minute what our technology solution is and how we overcome some of these. So Money Alive has a video engagement platform that is licensed by advisors, EBCs, that's employee benefit consultants, and schemes to deliver our impartial, interactive box sets to their members and clients. As the person watches the box sets, at the end of each chapter, the viewer is asked if they watched the video, if they understood the video, if they have any questions, and all this interactivity is captured in a report for the scheme or the advisor or the EBC. Because it's delivered through a platform, it can be delivered at a point of need. So that's the point at which people are actually going to be receptive to the message. So for example, if someone's 55, 6 months before, you can then start communicating to them about their pension options. If someone is making a live withdrawal from a pension or considering transferring it, you can educate that person about scams. If someone's thinking about giving up their defined benefit pension, you can educate them about the benefits of DB pensions versus DC. So you can deliver it in time, just in time, at a point when people will listen to the message. Because it's impartial, it overcomes some of the trust issues. And because it's delivered by technology, it can be done at scale. And that really concludes. I'm on my 10 minutes now. My buzzer's going. It can be delivered at scale because we're using technology. So today we've had over 175,000 videos viewed on our platform, with each providing a report of engagement and understanding for the scheme or the advisor or the EBC. Thank you. Hopefully my reception kept working, Andy.
It did. It really did. And thank you for delivering the message in such a succinct way. You've given a lovely kind of whistle-stop tour through your proposition, but I would encourage you, please, Ian, to pop your URL into the chat so that those who may have an interest in what you're doing can find out more, of course, as well as your contact details and so on. I think that Ian's made some really important points, and I'm going to be very blunt. I normally am, courteous but blunt. Ian's hit on something which I think is really important. He's hit on the point that there is, in my opinion, a predisposition, a tendency within the financial services sector for communications to be dominated by a legal perspective. You know, the lawyers in the insurance company or bank or financial advisory firm, etc. The lawyers tend to write stuff that is technically compliant, legally correct, but useless in terms of getting the message across. And frankly, every communications professional I speak to within financial services sector, when I raise this point, they say, yeah, that is exactly right. That is a big part of the problem. And people are fooled into thinking that providing loads and loads of information is being transparent, but that's not the case. There is a huge difference between disclosure and transparency. Disclosure is giving all the info. Being transparent about it is communicating that information in a clear and intelligible way, ideally in a format that enables the user to make decision-ready, to have decision-ready thoughts about it. So you've hit on a really important point. So many of the scams and scandals and issues that we've experienced in the sector really do have the roots in awful communications. I think Ian's made a particularly important point. You make me think of Bruce Springsteen, Ian, for two reasons. One is because of your musical endeavors, which I will refer to later on, and I know that Ian now knows what I'm talking about, and I promise I will refer to that later, Ian, with joy. And secondly, because Bruce Springsteen wrote a song called Blinded by the Light, and I refer to Blinded by the Light because all of us in the kind of transparency world often talk about the idea of shining a big bright light on things. And that's true. We do want to shine a big bright light on things, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that too much light, being blinded by the light, can actually make things worse. You end up with this kind of this blizzard of brilliant, i.e. bright data that's not information, it's not helpful, it's not clear and intelligible. That's why Ian's talk made me think of Bruce Springsteen, Blinded by the Light. If you don't know it through Springsteen, you might know it through Manfred Mann. It was a great track in the 70s. So those are my kind of initial comments in relation to what Ian has said. Thank you very much for articulating your thoughts, Ian, so clearly, and to such good time as well. Let's throw it open. Please just wave your hand if you'd like to make a point. I can see that Mr. Johnny Ruck, all the way in fabulous Florida, is first off. Johnny, go for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Ian. I just have a question for you. Would you say, I mean, I'm going back to your friend's father's thing, because I think we see it so often. I guess that, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-regulation at all before I ask this question. I'm quite the opposite, but are the regulators partly to blame here? Because the lawyers, etc., who are writing these documents, right, are under so much regulation that they're forced to write so much of what they do because of the regulation that they're under. So then you put all the information in. The problem that the regulator is causing is they need to regulate the people writing it to write it better, right? Rather than just telling them all the information that they have to put in it. The regulation should go further to tell them when it goes to the general public, how it should be, not how it should be written, but the type of things that should be involved. Otherwise, they're forced to just throw everything in there to be compliant with the regulation. So in that case, the regulation is just not helping the people it's supposed to be helping, which is the man in the street. Would you agree with that?
Where are you, Ian?
Hi, Johnny. Can everyone hear me okay?
You can, perfectly, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Johnny, I missed like the last part of your point, but I think it's very hard to say the regulators are to blame, because I think regulation evolves, and actually this is a topic that the Transparency Task Force are going to be discussing in more depth. But I absolutely concur with your point that the direction that they give forces the people they regulate to communicate in a certain way, and that because they have access to budgets, they should do more to test what the actual recipients of these messages understand by them. I mean, for me, all transparent communication starts with engagement. Because if somebody doesn't engage with the communication, no matter how open and transparent or well written or well made it is, it's utterly pointless. So part of a regulator work, I think, should be is to do some research about what the recipient of communications actually understand by them, and I think use that to modify the rules that they give to people. It has become very, very hidebound by rules, and compliance departments during my time in financial services, now 30 years, have just got bigger and bigger and bigger and command more and more of the budget. But as for the position of a consumer, I really honestly don't think that most people in business start off by thinking about them. And that's why we did what we did, because we were kind of fed up of it. And that we always begun with the consumer at Money Alive. So we wrote our stuff and we tested it on consumers, because if it doesn't work with them, it's utterly pointless. But you know, we're not regulated, but what we are is we are used by regulated businesses to communicate, and maybe that's another way forward. Specifically made the point that as soon as you make an editorial judgment, you will lay yourself open to criticism, and you just have to live with that and do what you think is right, and test what you think is and test what you think and see if it works. But you're always going to be open to criticism as soon as you start making judgments about content. It's so easy just to say everything and then just deliver and blind people by the light, to use Andy's example of the Bruce Springsteen, really.
I think Michaela's put her hand up. Yeah, Michaela, can you please be as short and sweet as you can? That would be helpful. Thank you.
I'll try. So I have 2 points. Technology can go the other way. Look at all of the social media that is used by crooks. So, you know, there are some very bad business ideas, but they are supported by superb marketing and websites. So where do you go? I think that the thing is education. Most people would rather leave the investment decisions to those in the know. Look at the lines behind the Madoff, right? And so I think it's the education. You cannot teach someone how to invest for themselves in a webinar. This is why you have to teach people that if it's too good to be true, okay, so how to be very critical thinking, and you know, how can I say, advance the simplest ideas like ETFs and things that are not. So that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to make a quick point before we move on, which is this. The TTF recognises the importance of communication. That's why we have a group all about it. We have a communications group. If anybody's not yet in our communications group that would like to join it, just pop Alexandra an email and she'll organise that for you. No problem at all. It's quite a good group in terms of its size. I think we've got about 40, 45 people in it. Most of them are communications professionals, but it's open to anybody with an interest in the topic. And the main thing that came out of the last symposium we ran about authentic communications is that there's a way to actually kind of measure the complexity of the language being used in comms in terms of average reading age. And basically, the financial services sector does not tend to write information in a manner that's in keeping with the average person in the street. And that's a real issue. There's a disconnect between the literacy, frankly, of the typical reader compared to what's actually written. That's been a great session. Can we please put our hands together to thank Ian for his opening presentation? Thank you very much, Ian. Very good job.
Thank you.
Good job indeed.
You're welcome.
Go straight to Georgia. So Georgia, please pick up from where you got to with your introduction. We're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say. You run a very young but very fresh, and from what I can see, very innovative organisation. So we wish you well, Georgia, with your commercial career ahead of you. Georgia, tell us all about what you do, because I think lots of folks here will find it very interesting indeed. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, and following on from what you just said, we try and write everything in a reading age of grade 8. So that's very conscious in terms of everything, all the content we produce. So I guess the backstory to Tomello is really that we started as a campaigning group at Cambridge Uni. We were trying to get the university endowment to be a more sustainable investor and to invest in line with the university's mission. Specifically, we wanted to get them to be proactive stewards, shareholders, so kind of getting involved in proposals, climate proposals, for example, at some of the oil companies that we were invested in. But the first problem we came across really was a problem around transparency, that the endowment themselves, the people running it, didn't really understand what companies we were invested in, because they were defaulting to fund managers to run a lot of that money. And then when we left university, I guess we realized that this was a problem across the board. You know, since the creation of the mutual fund, shareholders have been really far removed from the companies that they're actually invested into, which has brought all sorts of kind of benefits from a democracy perspective to, you know, allowing lots of people to invest and to be diversified. So it's not necessarily a bad thing altogether, but the disconnect between end investors, pension members, retail investors, often endowments and foundations, and the companies that they're investing into does cause quite major problems in the financial system. And I guess that intermediation means that there is just a disconnect, so that shareholders are not as bothered about some other stakeholders as they might be, like how companies treat their employees or the environment around them or communities or their supply chain. And effectively what you end up with is this kind of artificial focus on shareholder value above everything else. And you know, not only that, but because retail investors and pension members are not generally making the decisions, you know, on a company by company basis, they're investing in mutual funds. Mutual funds and the institutions that run them are then focused on short-term shareholder value, because they're competing on a day-to-day basis to win our business as consumers, which doesn't make any sense at all, because as consumers, we're trying to invest most of the time for our future, for kind of long-term horizons, and especially if we're talking about pensions. In my pension, I will hopefully be redeeming it in 50 years' time, and that is it's nonsensical that my pension fund at the moment is run for kind of quarterly performance. So with that backdrop, we have been trying to create a platform that helps to give transparency to pension members and retail investors about what companies are actually inside their mutual funds, and then actually giving them a voice at some of those companies, or at least at the level of the fund manager in the first instance, so that really they can feel more connected to where their money's going, and hopefully they can think about their money kind of in that sustainability sphere, like they do about their kind of travel and their consumerism and all these other things that are getting the kind of spotlight that finance isn't, just because of that lack of transparency. So the product we've created effectively kind of connects with a pension portal, and it shows an individual the underlying holdings in a mutual fund, and you know, we drill right down into funds of funds by connecting with individual fund managers, and then giving them a voice on annual general meetings. So company shareholder proposals, for example. So I can show you just briefly, I think if I share my screen, what a pension member would see if they use the platform. So back to kind of the reading age comment, it's really, really simple. Basically, a pension member can see their portfolio, which might be made up of a variety of funds as chosen by their scheme or their provider. They can see the underlying companies and in aggregate that's inside those portfolios, top 10 by industry or full company list down to the kind of minute percentages. And then they're able to see the votes that are going on at these companies, which are issues that fund managers are getting involved in all the time, but which as a pension member or a retail investor, you would have no idea you were invested in Walmart and no idea there was a sexual harassment issue at that company that your fund manager gets a vote on. So these are issues around ESG, as they call it in financial services. So animal welfare, government lobbying, plastic, sexual harassment, human rights, a real range of things. And what pension members are able to do on the platform is, I guess, we pull through some of that transparency, some of the information, as little as we can, really, while still giving them kind of both sides of the argument. And then a pension member can say what they think their fund manager should vote. And then that transparency loop feeds all the way back round so that a pension member can see what their fund manager did vote historically. So if we go into this Dollar Tree climate change vote, for example, the pensioner can see, or the pension member can see what they voted, what other people in their pension scheme voted, what their fund manager voted on their behalf and why, and then what the final outcome is. So just trying to pull some transparency into that stewardship process effectively. But it's not just about transparency, and this really comes back to what Ian was talking about, because this is really an engagement tool, and that's what we've realized it is it's not, for us, it was about sustainability and how can we drive good stewardship, and that is the ultimate outcome. But actually, by giving people transparency, we're able to engage them in a way that they weren't able to engage before. Because most people, when they think about pensions or investment, it's like super abstract, it's a black box, there's maybe they might be 25, but the picture on the website will be of pensioners, and it's really hard for people to relate to why that matters to them or their community or their environment in the moment. But by showing people, actually, these are the companies in your pension, Microsoft, Adobe, Apple, H&M, like companies that people interact with every day in their daily lives, you can create a connection and a meaning for people that isn't there if they don't have that transparency. And then also, obviously, pulling through the proposals gives them this sense of kind of having an agenda and being able to influence people with power, which at the moment they can't do. So it's good for people in financial services, because hopefully that connection with their pension increases their financial literacy. It just increases the kind of their financial well-being. They're less anxious because they understand more, and potentially they right-size their contribution, so they put the right amount of money into their pension rather than potentially ignoring it or not contributing enough, which many people in the UK are doing. And I think ultimately, obviously, the idea is that it improves the big picture for them and their retirement outcomes, for example, because they retire into a better world with kind of more connected society. But it seems like sometimes initially we get pushback from providers or asset managers thinking that this transparency is not good for them, but actually there's so much kind of opportunity in that transparency for them. So for asset managers to help kind of build connection with people and make them more loyal and kind of understand their individual brands. And also there's quite a lot of research, I was reading some stuff from Harvard Business School research this morning showing that actually where providers of financial services are clear about the trade-offs of the service, the positives and the negatives, it doesn't necessarily change the acquisition rates of that customer, but it improves the lifetime value of that customer and it improves the customer well-being. The ongoing interactions are better and richer, and there's less cancellations, and the customer costs less and earns the provider more. So across kind of so many factors, transparency in pensions and retail investment is really necessary and has positive outcomes for lots of different stakeholders. And that's the work really that we've been doing over the last 3 years since leaving university. And it's going really well from a provider perspective. The more progressive providers, at least, have really embraced it, and it's been exciting to see kind of institutions with 2 trillion under management, like Legal & General is an example of one of them, embracing the idea that their underlying shareholders who could have £500 invested in their pension could have a voice on some of these issues that they have so much power over. So we're making good progress, and it's super relevant to what you were saying, Ian, in terms of comms, because one of our largest challenges is that initial comms piece that goes out to invite pension members, especially in retail investors, to get involved. And so there's definitely still a comms barrier there, but hopefully the platform itself is quite objective, and there's little judgment does go into it. So on the whole, it's quite a good way to engage someone and start that kind of communication journey, I suppose, about something they might not typically be that interested in, or at least well versed on. So yeah, happy to answer any questions on that side of things. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Georgia, for delivering your message in such a clear way. Well, I think that what Georgia and her colleagues are doing is absolutely in line with what TTF is all about. So we really should work hard, Georgia, to collaborate and maximise on the common values we obviously share. That's a very important point, please, Georgia. Secondly, you're making me remember that roughly 3 years ago, the MPs, the members of Parliament in the UK, all got a bit rattled, because the members of Parliament in the UK, particularly the ones who were pro, sorting out climate change, sorting out the environment, etc., they wrote to the trustees of the parliamentary pension scheme itself to say, will you please tell us which companies our pension fund is invested in, and what's the carbon footprint, etc. And what a simple, logical, straightforward question. They couldn't get the information. The trustees basically did not want to share that information.
What?
I know, it's absolutely true. We had a Labour Party MP come and speak about this at one of the events that we ran. It's absolutely true. So this is exactly the kind of obfuscation, camouflage, opacity that we have to find ways to break through. And what Georgia's got in terms of her platform, what Georgia's got in her platform is just a really cool, simple, straightforward way to get the right information out there in a very, very clear and intelligible way. So good luck to you, Georgia. I'm going to make a connection between what George has been talking about and Gavin by referencing the matter I described earlier when the MPs were struggling to find out what was in their pension fund. So I'm sharing my screen. This is an FT article in February 2016. MPs call for disclosure on their pension funds investments. And if you read the article, it basically says the MPs were not being told what was in their pension fund. So the headline points are, trustees of the Parliamentary Pension Fund are coming under pressure to improve disclosure after refusing to give MPs detailed information about the fund's investments. And there's another bit here which I'll draw your attention to as well. Barry Gardner, who's the chap that came to speak at one of our events a few years ago when all this was going on. Barry Gardner, a senior Labour MP, and Caroline Lucas, the Green Party, complained to the trustees after they refused to tell Mr. Gardner how much of their portfolio was invested in fossil fuels. MPs are being denied simple information about the fund. He said, we've asked for, and we are not being given the details of where our pensions are being invested. And they basically had to complain as a group of parliamentarians to force this kind of disclosure to happen. And now the good news is that for all sorts of reasons, significant progress, of course, has been made in the last few years, but it's down to efforts of all sorts of people that is the case. Gavin, before we go into the specifics of what's in your chat, what you're doing at Icebreaker One feeds in directly to this whole narrative. So please do tell everybody a bit about that, because not everybody on the session knows about you and your amazing work with Icebreaker One. Thank you, Gavin.
Sure, I'm going to start joining some dots and then use them to illustrate what we're doing, I think. So the good news is that open banking exists, and for those of you not familiar with it, please do have a look, but it enables data sharing. It gives you effectively instruments GDPR and various other regulations, gives you back your data, gives you back control of your own data, and enables you to share it in a secure way with any third party. That is now across 100% of the UK market. It's also now being implemented across 100 countries. So it's changed the way that, the kind of issues that Georgia was highlighting, that not everybody is that interested in making it easy for customers to get access to their own data. That ship has sailed, right? So the good news is there with the FCA, there's an open finance advisory group, which I'm part of, where we're taking the principles and practice of open banking to pensions, to investments, to insurance. In fact, it will affect all financial services over time. And you can imagine there's the various bun fights that are going on, but we've been through it with the banks. So there's nothing new under the sun, frankly, that any of the financial sector can throw at us that we haven't already heard. Banking was the hardest, I would say, mountain to climb. In parallel, you've got this thing called TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Now, the UK has signed up to this as well. It's been a few years in the in development through the Financial Stability Board with Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg and so on, sort of helping to drive it. But it's now going to be mandatory. And what that means is to link this to your pension thing. Pension funds are going to be required to comprehensively report on climate change risks, which they're exposed to. Now, at the moment, it's more narrative-based. The data will come. But when you put these two things together, I think you get quite a different picture. So the kind of work that we're doing at Icebreaker One, which we're quite new, we started trading in April last year. We ended up with a team of about 120 people by October and over a few millions worth of investment, looking at how do we start unlocking the data and making the data work harder to deliver net zero. Now that's very wide reaching. We're working with people like Lloyd's Register Foundation, Willis Towers Watson, and a lot of the insurance companies on one side. We're working with the construction firms, people like Arup on the sort of city design side, right the way through to the energy sector, which is where we're looking at taking the next version of open banking to how do we open up all of the information around the energy sector. And that could be everything from a wind turbine right the way through to the smart meter. So there you've got massive many-to-many sort of network, and it needs good data governance to unlock it. So this whole kind of challenge where people are saying, oh, we couldn't possibly share our data, and they come up with all manner of reasons. It's a race to the bottom, or there's intellectual property issues. We're just bulldozing through them because we've done it with banking. And so we can address liability, we can address consent and consent management, we can address GDPR, we can address all of these kind of legal and commercial and intellectual property issues. We've got a framework that we can just put it in at one end, and it takes a while. It's not a straightforward process. You take these problems where people are saying no, and you put them through the machine, and you come out the other end with the policy, the policy framework, the trust framework, the regulatory pieces, legal pieces, and operational pieces, and so on. The technology is not a problem. We've been doing technology for a long time, and there's hundreds of solutions out there and multi-billion-dollar markets that now make the data exchange easy. It's the rest of it that is the hard bit. So we've got this culture change which is happening, and really it's a question of time. And the driver, from my point of view, is the more clear and straightforward the use case and the impact of that use case, the more you'll get the politicians on board, the more you get industry on board, the more you get consumers on board. Turning all of what I've just said into English is like the challenge there. So that's does that answer your kind of question there, Andy?
It does. You fill that gap very, very nicely indeed. Thank you, Gavin. Let's go back to Georgia to see if Georgia would like to make any final comments before we show our appreciation to Georgia for her presentation. Wish her and our colleagues well. Georgia, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed that up really well. Obviously, open banking is going to make open wealth or open finance easier, and there are organisations doing that, like Money Hub, for example, is doing a good job in that space with Sam Seaton already. I think that the thing also with open wealth, which is slightly different from open banking, is that we can cover 80% of the market by doing 20% of the work, because you've got 4 or 5 huge providers that have 4 million customers each, and maybe we don't need to worry so much about the long tail of pension providers in the first instance. Whereas with open banking, those organizations were so terrific, we needed to cover everyone. So I think hopefully there's some strides made in that department. But in the meantime, we can get quite a lot of that information, that it's not really a barrier for us. It only becomes a barrier when we want to connect lots of different accounts, which is a good problem for us to have if that is where we get to. So yeah, I'm excited. Gavin, it sounds like maybe we should catch up and talk about that, because it's a problem that our team are going to start to address. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me. And I feel super rude about I'm actually going to have to leave because I have a Burns thing with my dad. It's not very exciting, but it's been really good to meet you all, and hopefully I can do some of those follow-ups, Alex, that you set me up with.
Well, as you've mentioned Burns, if we can get haggis into space, I'm sure that we can somehow do climate change disclosure properly. So, Georgia, great to have you with us. We are going to be going to a comfort break very, very shortly. But first of all, folks, let's show our appreciation to Georgia for her very, very interesting presentation. Thank you, Georgia. Great job. Well done. Enjoy your presentation. And we have a bit of a treat. We're going to have a 5-minute break. But before we go to the 5-minute break, Mr. Ian Beeston and his colleagues have written a song that chimes with some of the messaging around a lot of TTF's work in the pension space. So Mr. Ian Beeston on the drums, plus some friends, 50 Ways to Lose Your Pension. I hope you can get this to work. We've got a 5-minute break, folks, including this, okay?
You should treat it carefully. Scams are increasing and cause grief and poverty. I'd like to help you keep your pension scammer free. There must be 50 ways to lose your pension. 50 ways to lose your pension. Call out of the blue soup. That's a scam plan. You don't need to be Roy. Just hang up the phone. If someone should mention early access to pension, guarantees you high returns, puts pressure on you. Is that a fake email? Is that a fake website? Is that message from someone you know? If you're feeling uncertain, just visit Scam Smart on the FCA website. Link in comments below.
Hooray! That was great. Well, that was very, very good. Ian, you've got a challenge, sir. Okay, here's a challenge. You and your buddies are going to come up with a song within 3 months from today. Okay, the song's going to be about transparency. It's going to be based on I Can See Clearly Now. So that's all you need to know. Use your initiative, get your head around there. I Can See Clearly Now, all about the need for greater transparency in the financial services sector. And you've got 3 months to do it, sir. Well done, Ian. We've got a short break, folks. Please be back in about 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. Bye all. Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our third and final main speaker. We're going to go to Stephen Hewlett-Light from Record Shaw. I got to know about Record Shaw's proposition through their chief exec, Joanne Smith, and was really, really impressed with it. In fact, it may also be something that Johnny and his colleague Sander over in Florida might want to take a look at. Again, Alexander, if you don't mind, please pick up a conversation for me with Johnny and Sander, and also Joanne at Record Shaw, plus Stephen. Stephen, please assume the audience knows nothing whatsoever about what you and your firm does. So take your time explaining it all. Over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
So as Andy says, I head up product for a company called Recordsure. We operate predominantly in the UK and in Australia. And I guess we do three or four things really. We help regulated businesses, particularly financial services, but also we help some branches of the UK government as well to record the conversations they're having with their customers, and to analyze those conversations to make sure that they're fair, that they're following the right process, but also that they're kind of talking about the right things. And that might sound a bit strange, because I guess many people on this call will have phoned a contact center at some point in the last 20 years and have heard this call will be recorded for some spurious purpose, usually for training purposes. But a lot of the conversations that advisors have with their customers, particularly in the wealth management industry, but also in mortgages, are in face-to-face environments, and that's obviously pre-COVID, but even in a post-COVID world, they're happening through channels like this, through Zoom and through other medium, and in environments that either aren't recorded or where those recordings are quite difficult to get to and make any real use of. Actually, in most instances, even in contact center environments, you tend to find that those recordings are only really dragged back out again when there's a complaint or a problem or something that needs to be investigated, and they're not really analysed or investigated as a matter of course. And they're occasionally used for supervisory activity, but again, in contact center environments. So what you tend to find is that those heavily regulated advice processes where consumers rely on the expertise of the advisor, they're kind of going unmonitored, unrecorded. And that leads to interesting challenges for banks and for financial services businesses, because they do a large number of these conversations and then need to rely on random sampling or kind of quite invasive supervisory practices like being in the room with the advisor, which of course changes everything the second you're in that sort of space. So we provide technology that's pretty unobtrusive and kind of sits there nice and transparently, but very kind of subtly in those conversations, to record those conversations between the advisor and the customer, and then to analyze across 100% of every interaction that the bank is having. And that's kind of plays, we talked a lot in some of these earlier presentations. I was really interested to hear about some of the transparency points that were being made. And some of the things that we're focused on is helping not only the bank to make sure that its process is being followed, but also to make sure that the advisor understands they're being assessed and kind of and reviewed on a really fair and transparent basis. You're not getting them on their worst day or their best day. You're seeing everything that they're doing and can make really kind of good judgments on their behaviors and their kind of their process and their adoption of disclosures to customers and so on. But also you can share that information with the customer. So in some instances, we have seen businesses go that far. So they're kind of really opening up and sharing the kind of audio and the transcription of those calls. So everybody's looking at the same information, right? You can take that information away and digest it later. When we started this process about 8 years ago now, there was a lot of resistance to the idea that these processes would be recorded. They were deemed as kind of customers won't want to be recorded, advisors won't want to be recorded. And over that period, we have proven that not to be true. That actually, if you understand and explain why this kind of process exists, then you can actually really break down some barriers. We see customer adoption rates and customer consent rates to being recorded of 98% plus. And we see advisors coming through the ranks now of some of the biggest banks that we work with, who've never known anything else other than recording, saying, I can't believe I would ever want to do this without that kind of that backstop really in the room. So it really helps drive efficiencies, of course, in terms of not having to drive around the country, managing your area and sitting in on lots of meetings, but also drives kind of transparency across the piece. So the level actually that we've seen some of the unions that we've anecdotal evidence of some of the unions even saying, look, this is great for employees, because actually now you're really treating this fairly and you're kind of looking across everything. And just because they've done one kind of bad day where they didn't cover enough of the detail that you'd expect them to, they can point to actually performance overall is kind of a more balanced view is really the point. So we do a couple of things. You can do all of this with a kind of transcription. Of course, we record, we produce a transcription, but then we do two things with machine learning, which has been really kind of the game changer for us over the last sort of 5 years or so. So with machine learning tools, we're now starting to map the bank's own process over the top of the conversation, which means we can then break down say a 60-minute or 90-minute mortgage conversation into the various components that you need to go through. So where did you talk about the objectives and needs of the customer? Where did you understand their income and expenditure? Where did you understand affordability? Where did you make your recommendation? And once you've broken a conversation down into its constituent parts, you've then got half a shot at applying some natural language processing tools that we also have, where you can start to look for language within those individual parts to say, okay, you might have talked about income and expenditure here, but did you cover off the following things? And you might have made your recommendation here, but did you make sure that the customer understood these disclosures? And what's really great about the disclosures thing, because it's a word personally I hate. As I said earlier on, I've been in financial services for a long time, worked around compliance for most of that period. And a disclosure is like the verbal version of a written down document that we were talking about with Ian's example earlier on, 90 pages long. You start getting to the verbal disclosures, they start getting pretty clunky pretty quickly and people switch off and don't listen. And what you really want is you want your advisors to be able to explain what these disclosures are there to explain, not read a script. And the NLP tools that we're using are actually enabling people to be a little more freeform with how they say these things and to explain them a little bit more in their own words and in words that they can see and understand that the customer is understanding, and without kind of the penalty effect of, well, you didn't read it exactly this way, so the tool didn't find it, so therefore you've been failed. There's actually a great deal of flexibility now in these kind of natural language processing tools that we're employing. So that's how we're kind of really helping a lot of the financial services businesses that we work with to kind of to work with their advisors, to work with their customers, to make sure that kind of everything is being done in the right way, is being disclosed in the right way, but also being assessed and kind of evaluated in a consistent way across the board. And what you start to see is that actually that breeds more trust in the process as well. So if you're in a conversation with your mortgage advisor, it's a bit like if you're in a mortgage advisor conversation and the supervisor turns up, you've got two schools of thought. One, why is the supervisor here? And two, well, at least I know that they're going to have to do it properly. But if you're turning up and it's a recorded conversation, you can relax in the knowledge of saying, well, actually, I know that this process is kind of being monitored and fair. But again, the advisor themselves also knows that kind of from their perspective is quite a balanced view. So it's kind of breeding that trust back into the industry in that way as well. And it also means that if there's you forgive the phrase, a he said, she said kind of situation later down the line in the event of a complaint or something like that, then actually you've got a really good authoritative record to go back to, and you're not solely reliant on what the written documentation was and were the handwritten notes of the advisor strong enough to back up the claim of the bank that, no, we never said that, or we never did this, or and so on. So having that record really helps everyone in the process, frankly, and kind of really shines a positive light, I think, on kind of really quite complicated advice processes at times. And so that's where we operate in the voice space. As I say, we largely do that in the UK and Australia, and we try to visualize things for people in ways that kind of are simple and easy to kind of to get your heads around. One of the things I'd like to maybe just quickly screen share for you a part of our demo product, so you get a bit of a sense of what I'm talking about. Let's see if we can do this. Hopefully you can see a screen here which is kind of got a bit of a waveform across the top. Look for a couple of nods. Andy, if you could nod if you can see that, thank you. So this is the kind of screen that we would use for analyzing or recording once it's gone into the system and been processed. And what you can kind of see is you've got these tags and labels across here. I'm going to come back to those. You end up with a kind of transcript of the conversation down the bottom here, so you can start to kind of read along and kind of follow along the conversation. This is synchronized with the audio. I'll save you listening to our demo audio. But essentially what you can then start to do is say, okay, here's the bank's own process. Let's have a little look at where they talked about attitude to risk. And I can jump to those parts of the conversation. Let's have a look at where they talked about the customer's pension. Okay, that's over here. What about if they're talking about income? Okay, that's over there. And those disclosures I talked about earlier on, okay, I can see there's some at the beginning and some at the end. And the idea is that you can kind of classify this whole conversation into those constituent parts, and then start to analyze for specific language and give prompts to supervisor team and advisors themselves to say, this is, you've done what you were supposed to do, or actually you haven't covered enough of the types of things that you want to cover. So it's kind of the product in a really simple nutshell. The demo for that one's usually a bit longer, but it gives you a sense of the visual that you start to see. And as I say, we're doing this at the moment with businesses in particularly mortgages and wealth management space, but across pretty complex conversations. So building some of that stuff out. I think where we intend to go, just as a couple of things to call out. The benefit of kind of pulling this software into a business is, yes, massively centered around culture and breeding a positive culture across the organization. Yes, about efficiencies as well, but also as we start to see more of these types of conversations taking place, particularly in regulated environments, businesses have made some really fast decisions around using things like Zoom, using things like Teams, using things like WebEx to now start to have conversations with customers in environments that they never did before. And again, these tools are actually really easy to plug into software like ours, which can then take on that analysis to make sure that everything's kind of properly assembled in one place, a logical case file for that customer, and also analyzed accordingly as well. So I'll probably pause there, Andy, if that's all right, and give you back the mic and take any questions that people have.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. We will go to questions in a moment, but RecordSure's got such a good demo on its website. I'm going to take the liberty of actually playing it. It's a couple of minutes long, but it really does bring everything that's just been explained together so nicely. And I'm pretty enthusiastic about this. I think that this kind of evidencing of what the actual interaction was between the organization and the customer is very, very important. So I hope you enjoy what you're about to see. And in particular, Natan has just joined us. Natan will introduce himself in a moment, and then Shan as well. Natan's in California, Shan's in Australia. Shan, another very early morning for you. Thank you for taking the trouble to be with us. So we'll go to Natan and Shan shortly. But first, we'll watch this this demonstration, which I think gets the message across in such a cool way. It's a couple of minutes, but I think you'll enjoy watching it. So here we go. there we go. So I ask myself a question. I say to myself, how much of the mis-selling that's occurred since August the 18th, 1986, the date that I joined the financial services industry, August the 18th, 1986, how much of the mis-selling that's occurred since then, by the way, loads of it's happened, how much of that would not have happened had that kind of tech been available? We can't change what happened or hasn't happened in the past, but we can hopefully influence what happens in the future. And to my mind, having an accurate, unambiguous, single definition of the truth has got to be a component that will help to make the system more truthful and transparent in the future. So I'm really pleased that Record Shore do what they do, and I'm really pleased that the TTF is doing what it can to help raise awareness of it. I can see so many connections between what you're doing and all sorts of members within the TTF, and I really do think that your focus on RegTech and that marketplace could be of great interest to several folks, including, as I mentioned earlier, Johnny and Sander over in Florida. So we're going to go to Q&A first of all, but just before we do that, we're going to get Natan to very briefly introduce himself, and also to Shan in Australia. So Natan, to you first of all, please, a quick intro. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Natan Seidenbeber. I'm the CEO of Stakeware. We're a San Francisco-based SaaS company, software as a service, and our focus is on, we've developed sort of a specialized CRM for ESG data, specifically focused on the concept of stakeholder trust. So how to manage stakeholder relationships and how to help companies understand the impact of their ESG operations and whether or not they're gaining or losing trust with their stakeholders. So that's a brief introduction.
Thanks, Natan, and feel free to put your contact details, the link to your website into the chat. Thank you. So we go from California all the way down to Australia. Mr. Shan Turnbull, a great big TTF supporter. Great to have you with us, especially as it's only, what, 5 in the morning or something where you are. Shan, please say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. My apologies for sleeping in. It's 6:45 a.m. in the morning at the moment, so I overstepped an hour and a 3/4. And I'm interested in reforming the theories and practices of capitalism. I wrote a book in 1975 called Democratizing the Wealth of Nations, and I seem to have been caught up with Andy with his mission of getting more transparency, which apparently I have a little minute to talk about the elephant in the room of stock exchanges, which don't allow you to know your client.
Thank you, Shan. We'll get to your just a minute round shortly. I think lots of people will be interested in what you have to say. But what we'll be doing now, folks, is opening up to Q&A in response to the session that we've just heard from Stephen. So please wave your hand if you have any questions or comments about that. It looks like folk may be stunned into silence. Would anybody like to pose a question, make a comment? I'll put one to you, Stephen. Oh, forgive me, Natalie put a hand up. I didn't notice. And then we'll go to Ian. Then I've got one for me. So Natalie, Ian, then me. Thank you, Natalie.
Just a quick one. Just really curious to understand a little bit more around the analysis, and has that been done across the industry? So multiple of your clients looking at the length of meetings, whether everybody does do the right disclosures, or is there any insight from the data that you have so far that could be useful?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one, because obviously we're a commercial business and contract with individual clients, obviously. But I think one of the things that we've tried to do, or are trying to do at the moment, is to deliver something which I'm referring to as a market model. So you saw those topic labels across that waveform there, but those can be quite costly to build, because they're kind of bespoke to an individual organization and their own process, right? But actually what we've started to try and do is develop market models that you could give to an entire market sector. So one for mortgages, one for financial advice, for example, or pensions advice. And you could start to overlay some more generic topic labels that you can then start to get better insight and compare across different businesses. which would be faster and cheaper and easier to implement for most businesses that would want to do this kind of thing. And then also, give you that kind of cross industry view. And we've had some conversations with the FCA about that in the past as well, about what how that data might be aggregated and rolled up. We're not quite there yet, though.
Thanks, Stephen. And let's now go to Ian with his point. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, Stephen. I enjoyed that. I think slight kindred spirits in some way. One of the issues that we've helped particularly larger advice firms overcome is consistent explanation of a particular thing without advisor bias. So an example of that could be something like pension freedoms and the tension, say, between recommending drawdown, which provides an ongoing income, and recommending an annuity, which might be in the client's best interest, but it's just a one-off payment. And we found a lot of clients appreciate that using a box set, an interactive box set, you can disclose a lot of information in an unbiased way ahead of then an advice meeting, which then can be recorded. But that combination of using box set technology is less kind of dependent on one-to-one human interaction. You know, that coincidence of availability, all the shortcomings there are of, you know, using humans in this process. So to me, there seems like a potential for good joined up working there for consistent and efficient delivery of information. So it's just an observation, really.
Yeah, and look, I think I completely agree that we're seeing a lot of that movement in terms of those advice processes where you end up with 2 or 3 parts to the process and it's not all hinged on the conversation. Interestingly, one of the things that we've been doing with the Australian market as well is we have another product which sits alongside the voice piece I've been talking about today, which is called Docs, which is all about ingesting large volumes of documentation and then kind of analyzing that again with similar sorts of tools to be able to pull out where did you get the right evidence and can you back up the fees and the charges that you've been making to kind of customers over the years. But also being able to bring these 2 products together is kind of my dream, if you like, to bring these 2 things together and say, actually, before the advice is signed by the customer to say, yes, I'm happy to implement it, that you've really been able to assess, have you given them all of the right tools, all of the right documents and had a good conversation? And then the advice is kind of then put into effect, right? Because you're minimizing the risk to all parties all at once then.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Stephen. Here's my quick comment, or rather question. Stephen, have you had any experience where you may have encountered an organisation that should be interested in RecordSure, but isn't, when you've suspected that perhaps it might be because they're not that confident that the process their Salesforce uses actually isn't that good, isn't that thorough, isn't that kind of compliant? Any thoughts about pushback to you because it would actually frankly shine a big bright light on failings in the process? Equally, have you had some organizations who've said to themselves, you know what, this could actually be a catalyst for doing things better, because if everything's going to be recorded, my goodness me, we need to make sure we're doing things properly. Any comments around that, please, Stephen?
Yeah, I'd say, Andy, you're hitting on probably the single biggest fear of most businesses when we start this conversation with them, right? And it's a completely natural one. And if you look at the changes that came in under SMCR a couple of years ago, it only makes that situation more pressing. So yes, we do, of course, we have conversations with businesses where they're kind of saying, well, okay, I've got other priorities at the moment, and you suspect there might be another angle there as well. But what I would say is that the majority of people we're talking to, they're not trying to not record these conversations because they don't believe it's a good thing. It usually comes down to budget prioritization and other challenges that people have. What I would say for the customers that we have and the clients we have seen not just them embracing it and kind of really understanding the technology and using it in those conversations, but also starting to find things out they didn't know. So you can put a lot of faith in random sampling processes to find your systemic issues, even if those issues aren't going to cause you regulatory problems. They might just be bugbears from a customer perspective that you just think that process could be slicker, could be better, could be more efficient for the customer as well. And actually you start, if you analyze everything, you start to see those systemic issues. You can't hide them. and you're less susceptible to a random sampling not picking it up and so on. So I think mostly we see people wanting to get into this and do the right thing with it. But you of course, not every business looks at things in that way.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed for your session. Let's all show our appreciation for that. That was great. Thank you very much indeed. And we wish you and your colleagues success commercially. You've invested a hell of a lot of time, effort, resource, money, and I think you've got something which is pretty world class there. Good luck with it. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to invite Shan to speak. Now, Shan spoke at the event we ran in Sydney last year. And when Shan spoke, he spoke very, very powerfully, very, very, very powerfully, and in a very compelling manner about the need for radical reform of governance in the system. And I've always listened very carefully to what Shan says, because he often says things that really take my own thinking further. And Shan wants to share some thoughts he has about the potential to radically reform the way stock markets work. So brace yourselves, folks, for a few minutes of insight into a very complex and very important world. Shan, over to you. If you can kind of capture everything you want to say in a few minutes, that would be good, and then we'll throw it into Q&A. Shan, over to you. Thank you. Please start off with an introduction so you properly get to help everyone understand what your background is as well. Thank you, Shan.
Oh, thank you, Andy. I was most impressed with the meticulous disclosure that Stephen is talking about. And it just makes it so amazing and that the stock exchanges of the world will not allow you to know your client. That's the most basic thing in financial service industry, know your client. And in the old days, stock exchanges were in the coffee houses, you knew your client. But nowadays, not only don't you know who's selling you the shares, you don't even know who's the ultimate beneficial owner control of the shares. There's no disclosure, and yet there's meticulous disclosure of banks of trading, and it's a way of laundering money. If you don't know who the ultimate owners and controllers are, it's a way for the broker to deal against you. It's a way of being subject to. I've just put on a one. I've done a minute.
You carry on, Shan.
Yeah, okay. I can't. I was trying. Sorry, I've just ruined everything. And so what I'm suggesting is that the Australian Stock Exchange, for instance, trades its own shares without any sunlight. So I'm promoting sunlight share trading, where the directors know who the ultimate beneficial owners and controllers are. Directors don't know who they're accountable to. So and I'm suggesting that if you have disclosure of the ultimate owners and control of all shares and on the public record, and you know who you're buying from or selling from, then any company can trade its shares without being on a stock exchange. So you wouldn't need a third-party exchanges at all. Now, there's more companies in America trading their own shares in share ownership plans. There, everybody knows who is the owner and the seller of the shares. But it doesn't happen for public companies. It's misnamed. They're not public companies. They're actually privately owned and controlled with people, money launderers, terrorists, and bribery and corruption going on as a way of laundering your money. And Andy's very kindly agreed to be on a panel session for the Academy of Finance next month with your local sheriff of London, Professor Alderman Michael Manelli, and a gentleman from the Turkish Stock Exchange who's an expert in how they operate. And so I'm looking for questions from the people here. What are the hot spots? What would concern you? And I know the big argument was, oh, we've got to protect the privacy of the client. Well, if you want to protect the privacy of the client, they should trade on use private equity. There's plenty of private equity, and people that want privacy with lots of wealth, then they can get it. Use private equity, but not a public company. Have full disclosure. That'll do, Andy. I can't hear you, Andy.
Yeah, oh, you were. Sorry.
Thank you. We had a bit of noise interference whilst you were speaking, Shan, but I think most people got most of what you said. Shan, please do feel comfortable to put a message into the chat with your contact details so that folks that may have an interest in what you're exploring can progress the conversation with you. It's been a really interesting event. We've had a great presentation from Ian Beeston talking about the way that technology is helping to create when needed videos that help to explain important things to consumers to help them make sure that they make very well informed decisions. We then had Georgia Stewart from Tumalo talking about the idea that it should actually be pretty straightforward and easy for pension savers to understand what they're buying through their pension fund, and how technology is actually able to report holdings, information about ESG related matters, so on and so forth. That was particularly interesting, I thought, in terms of how some young, fresh minds straight out of Cambridge see the world and what they're trying to do to make that world a better place, which is essentially what the TTF is all about. And Stephen, of course, spoke about Record Shore and its ability to monitor, track, evidence the real dialogue that's been going on between the organisation and the consumer, not only, of course, to protect the consumer's interest, but also to provide the organisation with a platform upon which to find potential improvements, particularly if there are systemic issues. We've got a few minutes left before we wrap things up at 8 o'clock. Sorry, at 6 minutes to 8 now, top of the hour. Obviously, we've got folks in Europe and other countries as well, so I shouldn't really refer to 8 o'clock, but top of the hour. So I'm going to go to gallery view so I can see everybody once again. Whether it's about something we've covered through one of the sessions or anything else that is somehow related to technology, transparency, truthfulness, who'd like to share a further point as we spend the next few minutes getting to close? Wave your hand if you'd like to say something. Franziska in Austria, go for it, Franziska. But of course,
I'm going to make a point I've made earlier in a different symposium, but simply that I feel that the Inland Revenue have done wonders at simplifying their documentation. Like 40 years ago, it was a jungle of hugely long documents which one couldn't comprehend. And now I feel that the Gov.uk website and the information from the British government has really become clear. So they've managed to reform their communications, in my opinion.
that's really interesting. Thank you, Franziska, for sharing that. I don't have much interaction with HMRC, but it sounds like you're pretty impressed with what they've done, which is great to hear. Thank you. Anybody else would like to share something? I think it looks like we're all pretty much almost ready to go, but we'll go to Ian. Back to Ian. Thank you, Ian.
I was just really going to agree with that last point. And what we've done in our interactive box sets is included a number of links, particularly to government websites, which we think are excellent. And then what our reporting does is it tells the advisor or the scheme whether the person clicked on that link. So a good example would be a link to Scam Smart in the scams videos. And, you know, there's some real quality things like intestacy calculators, budget planning, state pension forecasts. There's some really good resource out there now. And it keeps it in a safe environment as well. Keeps people safe from going off and starting Googling, which is where scammers, you know, start to come in, really.
Absolutely, I agree entirely. Franziska, back to you.
I was at a different meeting about scams generally, and it seemed to me that one of the biggest problems for the general public is actually not knowing which of the many websites to go to, because there is a complete, you know, there must be about 20 different websites like ScamSart, Money Savings, Money Advice, and so on and so forth. And it has actually been an idea, Andy, that I've had, because I know I was nursing other ideas, but whether it would be nice to have a sort of attempt to hierarchy of these organizations, who's behind them, what is the aim of each organization, because it's very easy to phone one up and they say, oh, now you talk to this one and then you talk to that one, and they probably want to put you back to the earlier one. And it would be nice to have a roadmap of where to go for all the different pieces of information that one can get. I do feel it would be better if it was more, you know, each one's nice, but it's not easy to know where to go for this and that.
You're quite right. I think you make a very good point, which makes me want to share a particular web page. Can you bear with me, folks, while I quickly get to this? APPG on pensions. So what I'm sharing with you, or rather what I will be sharing with you in just a moment, is the website for the all-party parliamentary group on pension scams, which is run by the Transparency Task Force. We are the secretariat for it, and one of the things we wanted to do was to make a kind of one-stop shop for all resources. Hence me clicking on the resources page. And in just a few months, we've managed to bring together all sorts of incredibly powerful, useful information around these sorts of issues by reaching out to all these different organizations and saying, you know, what have you got that might be useful to people concerned about pension scams? They might be somebody that's already been scammed or might be thinking of making a decision. They might need to know how to complain and all the rest of it. And I make this point following up from what Francisca says, because it's really hard to start to think about how all these treasure chests of information kind of relate to each other, and who do you trust and who don't you trust. It's an absolute minefield. I continue to be totally convinced, folks, and this will be my final point before we wrap up. I continue to be totally convinced that when I kick the session off by saying that technology is a friend of transparency and truthfulness and trustworthiness, I think I'm right in taking that view. That's why we are very, very keen to become aware of people that have tech that's pro-consumer, that's helpful, that helps turn lots of complicated information into relatively clear and straightforward messages. That's what we need to do to make the world a more trustworthy place. So I'll just check in with everybody to see if there's anybody that wants to say something before we finally close the session. Just wave your hand at me if you do want to say something. It looks like everyone's happy, which is good. I'm very happy because I think we've run yet another, hopefully, a useful session for you all. Thanks again to our speakers from Ian, from Georgia, and of course from Stephen as well, plus Shan for his very progressive comments about what needs to happen to radically reform the way the world stock markets work. Shan has put his contact details into the chat, I see, so you can connect with Shan if you'd like to get further information there as well. And also in the chat, which will be circulated tomorrow, there's Shan's document, The Case for Sunlight Share Trading. I urge you to read it if you have an interest in the world of investments. At exactly the top of the hour, as if I knew what I was doing, but it's of course more luck than judgment, we're going to be wrapping the session up, folks. Thank you all very, very much for your attendance and participation, and a round of applause for everybody for their contributions today. Thank you very much indeed.